Before Mass, one of the servers said to me in the altar room, he says, "We have a ton of servers today." And so let me see if that's right. So I added up the weights. We only have 831 pounds of servers. So maybe I should add the lectors in and the, stuff. Okay, right. So we're halfway to Christmas. 2 weeks of Advent has passed, and we've started this third week. So just 2 weeks to go. And this third Sunday of Advent is called Rejoice Sunday or Gaudete Sunday. The rose candle is lit. There's rose of the altar. There's flowers. We're halfway there, more than halfway there. And, we hear this theme of rejoicing throughout our readings today. Some of the things we heard in our readings: shout for joy, be glad, exult, rejoice. So I might ask the question, what is the cause of our joy? More to the point, why should we rejoice? Now, no doubt there are many blessings that we all have, but that does not mean there's no sadness or difficulties in our lives either. We face real challenges. Fear and uncertainty continue to abound. We just, turn on the news, look in the world around us. Fear of rising prices and economic uncertainty. Fear of a fresh outbreak of the coronavirus. Now we're up to Omicron. Wonder what the next Greek letter is going to be, Fear of, political leadership or larger cultural issues. Fear of what the world will look like for our children when they grow into adulthood. Yet despite all that, we are still called to rejoice. Now, we might hear these words of rejoicing in Scripture today and think to ourselves, well, that's easy for them to say. They're not living in these times. But actually, I think the times they lived in were far worse. Our first reading from the prophet Zephaniah. He's writing in a time, he writes in a very difficult time. And most of his writing is actually about the impending judgment of God. For the times which he's written, their little nation is stuck between three mighty empires: Assyria, Egypt, and Babylon, all of which have their eyes on this little kingdom of Judah. Yet Zechariah calls his people to shout for joy, to be glad, to exult, to sing with joy. The Apostle Paul, who writes to the community of Philippi, he writes to this community while from prison. Paul doesn't know whether he will live or die. He does not know whether they will set him free and he can continue his mission of preaching and spreading the gospel, or whether an execution is around the corner. Yet Paul says, as we heard in our second reading, rejoice in the Lord always. And then he repeats it. I say it again, rejoice. John the Baptist is preaching under the yoke of Roman oppression, and even the leadership of his own people has been compromised. There is no end in sight of this oppression or the feckless leadership of his fellow countrymen. Yet he preaches good news. How can this be? I think we need to focus on what joy is. Joy must be something different from just happiness or prosperity or contentment or pleasure. There are many things that might make me happy for a time. Another Stanley Cup championship, okay, that make me happy. Or if my alma mater, Jesuit High School, wins the state football championship this Saturday, that's going to make me happy, Got some pre-happiness already there. So another thing that make me happy is the removal of travel restrictions and these idiotic testing things you have to go through to get back through the country, all right? So it made me happy if they got rid of those things, you know? Make me happy to have a beautiful Christmas. You know, it makes me happy if everyone who has been away from Mass because of sin or fear, if they come back to Mass. I'm happy to see our, parishioners home from college. That makes me happy. Certainly, if suddenly the collection doubled, that also make me happy. I'm sure there's things that in your own life you could say, this or that thing, if this happened, that would make you happy. But such things do not really bring joy. Joy, it seems to me, does not come from the outside in, but rather it goes from the inside out. Joy, likewise, is one of the chief characteristics of sanctity, of holiness. Saints did not live in perfect times without any problems. Quite the contrary. Yet so often when we read about the saints and learn of their lives, and if we have the opportunity ever to be with the saint, joy radiates from them, even in the midst of the most difficult of situations. I think of someone like St. Maximilian Kolbe, a Polish Franciscan priest who was sent to the terrible concentration camp of Auschwitz. And there he faced immense cruelty, but he never forgot who he was. And still in the midst of that horrible situation, continued to be a priest and minister with joy to other prisoners. And when a prisoner had escaped, and in retribution, 10 men were selected randomly to be sent to the death block, to be starved to death. And when one of the condemned men began begging for mercy because he was married and had children, Maximilian Kolbe stepped forward and simply said, "I am a Catholic priest. I wish to take this man's place." And over the next 2 weeks, he continued to radiate joy from him and share it with his fellow condemned prisoners. You might ask the question, well, how can this be? Don't you know you're going to die? See, joy flows from within, and it flows when we realize that we are in the presence of God. Those who are filled with joy today know that. Those who are not have either forgotten that or maybe never knew that. So the more we are aware of God's presence in our lives, the more joyful we are. That's why joy is so often tied with sanctity. Paul always links joy with the sufferings of Christ, ironically enough. Why? Because it is through Jesus' suffering, through his cross, that we're saved. The doors of heaven are open for us. And so how can we not rejoice? For non-believers, they look at the cross and see only death and defeat, something they don't understand. Yet we know otherwise. We see otherwise. We believe otherwise. We know the cross changes everything. The perspective of salvation fills us with joy. For we know that regardless of what difficulties or sufferings we face, heaven is assured for those who remain faithful. John the Baptist comes to prepare the way for the Messiah, the way for Jesus. He calls those who have gone astray, those gone astray from God, to come back to God. That's why Advent is such a beautiful season to go to confession. So many opportunities this week here and our local parishes to do just that. It's interesting, sometimes people come to confession and they say to me, Father, I really don't like going to confession. As you say, yeah, I think probably you're like most people. You don't like going to confession, but you like coming out of confession. And that's the thing, we come out of confession filled with joy because those things that weighed us down aren't there, and we can start anew. And the Lord desires in us, as we see in the preaching of John, a change of heart with real consequences. As John says, to share with the poor, to act with justice, to show mercy and compassion to others. The bottom line is, the days of vengeance are over, as the day of salvation is about to dawn. And this was true at the time of John, and it is certainly true in our time and our day. No matter what challenge or difficulties we are facing now or face in the future, Christ has come to save us. How can we not but rejoice and be filled with joy?